Hey guys, welcome back to the Readers. I hope you're having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is Pro-Revenge Story, backstory. In the mid-2010s, I worked for overpriced music shop. I really liked my job aside from one coworker, Heather. We just didn't get along. I made the best of it, but she was a borderline bully. Of course, she gets promoted to keyholder and proceeds to turn into a full-blown power trip bully. She made my life hell, and a job that I previously loved I couldn't stand anymore. "You need to restock these shelves before you leave," Heather would bark at me 5 minutes before closing, even though I'd spent the whole day organizing displays. "I already did the restocking this morning," I'd reply. "Well, they look terrible now. Do it again," she'd snap, walking away before I could respond. I made a formal complaint that made its way to HR, but I was done working there, which was her goal. Of course, when HR investigated my claims, they found she and the assistant manager, Tyler, were dating. The HR rep looked genuinely surprised. "Did you know about this relationship?" she asked me during our meeting. "Everyone knew," I replied. "They weren't exactly subtle about it. She was moved to another store since fraternizing was against policy. Apparently, she didn't like that store and quit. A few months later, I was happily working at Closing Soon Books. And who gets a job at the Closing Soon Books at another mall? Heather. Over the next few months, she proceeds to do little things to annoy me, like hanging up when I would call their store for a customer or leave me on hold forever. "Sorry for the wait," I'd tell frustrated customers. "I can't seem to get through to the other location." "This is ridiculous," they'd complain. "I've been standing here for 10 minutes. Of course I would get in trouble for not effectively handling the customer with their needs. The revenge. About 6 months into the job, I heard through the grapevine of store gossip that Heather had been injured in a car accident. Apparently, she had hurt her back and went on medical leave. She couldn't stand for more than 10 minutes at a time without excruciating pain. This is important. She was on indefinite leave, and her store could not hire anyone to replace her while on medical leave, leaving them short-handed. And I knew her manager was really annoyed after a few months. "It's been 8 weeks," I overheard her manager, Dave, complaining on the phone. "We're drowning over here, and corporate won't approve a temporary replacement." 2 months later, a few friends of mine and I decided to go play pool. A former co-worker, Jason, from the overpriced music shop was there. "Man, too bad you weren't here last night. It would have been a reunion. Heather and Tyler were here playing pool," Jason said, clapping me on the shoulder. "Heather was playing pool?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Oh yeah, they come in every Wednesday night," he replied, taking a swig of his beer. "Really? That's interesting. Every Wednesday, huh? How long has this been going on?" "A few months now. She's pretty good too. Wiped the floor with me last month." "Yes. For the entire time she was on medical leave, Heather was out playing pool once a week, not at home in debilitating pain like she claimed." The next day, I went to her Closing Soon Books and asked to speak to the manager. I told him all about her weekly pool sessions and encouraged him to be at the pool hall the next Wednesday night to catch her in action. "Are you absolutely certain about this?" Dave asked, his expression hardening. 100%, I replied. "You can see for yourself tomorrow night around 8 p.m. That Thursday, she was fired. "You have no idea what you've done," she hissed at me when she spotted me at the mall food court a week later. "I think I do," I replied calmly. "You got caught." The last time I saw her, she and her friend were attempting to follow me home from work. I called the police and led them into the police station where they told her to leave me alone or be arrested. "This isn't over," she threatened as the officer escorted her away. "Actually, it is," the officer replied firmly. "One more incident and you're spending the night in a cell." She stayed away from me after that. The next one is an entitled people story. When I bought my house 3 years ago, I thought I was getting a great deal. The place was perfect. Decent size yard, quiet neighborhood, and the HOA fees seemed reasonable. What I didn't realize was that I was moving into what would become a battlefield with the most power-hungry group of retired busybodies you could imagine. The homeowners association in our neighborhood was run by this council of 5 people who seemed to have nothing better to do than make everyone else's life miserable. The president was this guy everyone just called Bob, mid-60s, always wearing khaki pants and polo shirts with the kind of mustache that screamed, "I peaked in 1987. Bob had been HOA president for 8 years running, and he treated the position like he was running a small country. For the first 2 years, I managed to fly under their radar. I kept my grass cut, didn't paint my house any weird colors, and generally followed their endless list of rules. Sure, I got the occasional nastygram about leaving my trash cans out too long or having a small oil stain on my driveway, but nothing too crazy. Then came the great landscaping project of last spring. I decided to redo my backyard. Nothing fancy, just wanted to put in a small garden, maybe add a patio where I could grill and relax on weekends. I submitted all the proper forms to the HOA, waited for their approval, and got the green light after they nitpicked every detail for 3 weeks. The project was going great until one morning I woke up to find 2 guys with shovels standing in my backyard. I threw on some clothes and went outside to see what was going on. "Excuse me, what are you doing in my yard?" The older guy looked up from where he was measuring something with a tape measure. "HOA hired us to put in a walking path. Should only take a couple days." I stood there confused. "A walking path? Through my backyard?" "Yeah. Connects the community center to the park on the other side. Makes it easier for residents to access community facilities." This was the first I was hearing about any walking path. I told the guys to hold off while I figured out what was going on and immediately called the HOA office. The secretary transferred me to Bob, who explained the situation in his usual condescending tone. Apparently, the HOA had decided they needed better pedestrian access between the community amenities. After studying maps and surveys, they determined that the most efficient route was straight through my backyard. "But you can't just build something on my property without asking," I said. Bob's response was classic HOA logic. "Actually, if you read your HOA agreement, Section 47B clearly states that the association reserves the right to make improvements for community benefit, including establishing walkways for resident access to shared facilities." I pulled out my HOA documents, and sure enough, buried in pages of legal nonsense was a clause that seemed to give them broad authority over community improvements. The language was vague enough that they were claiming it let them build whatever they wanted, wherever they wanted, as long as it was for community benefit. "Look," Bob continued, "this path is going to increase everyone's property values. You should be thanking us. Plus, it's only going through the back corner of your yard. You'll barely notice it." But I would notice it. The proposed path would cut right through where I was planning to put my garden and would require removing 2 mature trees that provided privacy for my neighbors. When I pointed this out, Bob's attitude shifted. "The decision has been made. Construction starts Monday, whether you like it or not. If you have a problem with it, you can take it up with our legal department." That's when I realized these people weren't interested in compromise or discussion. They had decided, and everyone else could deal with it. Monday morning came, and the construction crew was back. I watched from my kitchen window as they started marking where the path would go. Bob showed up around noon to supervise, walking around my yard like he owned the place, pointing and giving instructions. I went outside to try one more time to reason with him. "Bob, this is really going to mess up my landscaping plans. Isn't there another route you could use?" He barely looked at me. "The route has been finalized. The engineering study shows this is the most cost-effective option." "What engineering study?" "The one commissioned by the HOA board. Everything's been done properly and legally." "Can I see a copy of this study?" HOA documents are available for review during business hours at the community center. The whole conversation felt like talking to a brick wall. Bob clearly enjoyed having power over everyone, and he wasn't about to let some homeowner question his authority. By Wednesday, they had cleared the path route and started laying gravel. I came home from work to find a 3-foot-wide strip cut through my backyard with my 2 trees gone and piles of wood chips where they used to be. That evening, I drove over to the community center to look at this so-called engineering study. The office was closed, naturally. I came back the next day during lunch, and the secretary told me the documents were being reviewed by legal and weren't available for public viewing yet. Something smelled fishy. I decided to do some investigating on my own. I called the city's building department to ask about permits for the path. The woman I spoke to was confused. A walking path through private property? They would definitely need permits for that, especially if it involves removing trees and grading. Let me check our records. After a few minutes on hold, she came back. I don't show any permits filed for that address or that type of work. If they're doing construction without permits, that's a violation. This was getting interesting. I also called the county assessor's office to ask about easements. If the HOA really had the right to build on my property, there should be some kind of legal easement filed with the county. The clerk I spoke to was helpful and looked up my property records. I don't see any easements registered for pedestrian access or community improvements. If someone is claiming easement rights, they need to have proper documentation filed with the county. So now I had confirmation that the HOA was building their path without proper permits and without a legally registered easement. They were essentially trespassing and doing unpermitted construction on private property. But here's where it gets really good. On Friday afternoon, Bob showed up while the workers were finishing the gravel base for the path. He was clearly proud of the project and was taking pictures with his phone. I walked over to chat. "Looks like it's coming along," I said, trying to sound neutral. "Should be finished by Monday," Bob replied. Then residents will have 24-hour access to walk between the community center and the park. Really improves the functionality of our neighborhood. 24-hour access? Of course, community access means access whenever residents need it. This is basically a public walkway now. There it was. Bob had just handed me exactly what I needed. So this is essentially an emergency access route? I asked innocently. Sure, you could call it that. If someone needed to get from the community center to the park quickly, for exercise, to meet up with neighbors, whatever, this path provides direct access. And it's available to all residents at any time. Absolutely. That's the whole point. Bob was so pleased with himself that he didn't realize what he was admitting to. He had just confirmed that the HOA considered this path to be a public access route available for emergency use. Over the weekend, I spent some time researching municipal codes and emergency access requirements. What I found was very interesting. According to city regulations, any pathway designated for emergency or public access on private property requires specific permits, safety features, and regular maintenance inspections. Emergency access routes also have to meet certain width requirements, have proper lighting, be clearly marked, and be accessible to emergency vehicles if needed. Most importantly, if someone claims to have created an emergency access route, the city has the authority to inspect it immediately and can require it to be brought up to code or removed entirely. Monday morning came and the work crew was back to finish the path. They were laying some kind of crushed stone surface and installing a couple of small signs that said, "Community Walking Path, Residents Only." By lunchtime, the path was officially complete. Bob showed up to do a final inspection, and I could see him on the phone, probably calling other board members to brag about finishing the project on time and under budget. That afternoon, I made my call to 911. 911, what's your emergency? Hi, I need to report an unpermitted emergency access route that was built on private property without proper safety features. The dispatcher was a bit confused at first, but I explained the situation. I told them that the HOA had built what they claimed was a 24-hour public access path for emergency use, but it didn't meet city safety codes and wasn't properly permitted. So you're saying there's a safety hazard with an emergency access route? Exactly. The people who built it specifically told me it was for emergency access, but it doesn't have proper lighting. It's not wide enough for emergency vehicles, and there are no safety barriers. The dispatcher took down all the information and said they would send someone out to investigate. About an hour later, I saw a city truck pull up, followed by a vehicle from the fire department. Two inspectors got out and started walking around the path, taking measurements and making notes. Bob must have gotten a call because he showed up about 15 minutes later, looking panicked. I watched from my kitchen window as the inspectors explained the situation to Bob. Even from inside the house, I could tell he was getting upset. He kept pointing at documents and making gestures, but the inspectors just kept shaking their heads. After about 20 minutes, one of the inspectors came to my door. "Are you the property owner?" "Yes. We need to ask you some questions about this walkway. Did you give permission for this construction?" I explained the whole situation, how the HOA claimed they had the right to build it, how they said it was for emergency access, and how I had discovered they didn't have proper permits or easements. The inspector nodded. "Based on what we've found, this construction violates several city codes. It's unpermitted work on private property, and if it's truly intended for emergency access as they claim, it doesn't meet any of the required safety standards." What happens now? We're issuing a stop work order and requiring immediate removal. The pathway has to be gone within 72 hours, and the property needs to be restored to its original condition. I tried not to smile too big. The inspector walked back over to Bob, and I could see him handing over official-looking papers. Bob's face was getting redder by the minute as he read through the documents. Then Bob made what might have been the biggest mistake of his HOA career. Instead of accepting the situation gracefully, he decided to argue with the city inspectors. I couldn't hear exactly what he was saying, but his body language made it clear he was challenging their authority. He was waving his hands around, pointing at the HOA documents, and generally acting like the inspectors were idiots who didn't understand the situation. Bad move. The fire department inspector, who had been relatively patient up to that point, apparently had enough of Bob's attitude. He walked back to his vehicle and spent a few minutes on the radio. 20 minutes later, a police car showed up. Now I had to get closer to hear what was happening. I walked out to check my mailbox, which happened to be near where all the excitement was taking place. The police officer was asking Bob to explain why the HOA thought they could do unpermitted construction on private property. Bob's response was something about HOA authority and legal rights, but the officer wasn't buying it. "Sir, according to these inspectors, you've built a walkway on someone else's property without permission and without permits. That's trespassing and illegal construction. But we have the right under our HOA agreement." HOA agreements don't override city building codes or property rights. You need permits for this kind of work, and you need the property owner's consent. Bob tried to argue that the HOA had broad authority over community improvements, but the officer cut him off. Did you file an easement with the county? Well, no, but the HOA agreement clearly states, did you get building permits from the city? That wasn't necessary because, sir, it sounds like you built something on someone else's property without permission and without permits. That's a violation of city ordinances. I had to walk back toward my house because I was starting to grin too, obviously. The whole confrontation lasted about another 10 minutes. In the end, Bob was issued citations for unpermitted construction and trespassing. The HOA had 72 hours to remove the entire path and restore my yard to its original condition, or face daily fines of $500. But the best part was yet to come. By evening, word had gotten around the neighborhood about what happened. It turned out several other homeowners had similar issues with the HOA over the years, but nobody had ever successfully challenged Bob and his board. My next-door neighbor came over to thank me. Apparently, the HOA had been planning to put a community garden in his front yard next month, using the same legal justification they tried to use on me. I was dreading that fight, he said. But after seeing what happened to their walking path project, I don't think they'll be so quick to claim they can build whatever they want. The following morning, a different construction crew showed up to remove the path. Bob was there supervising, looking miserable. The whole project took most of the day. They had to remove all the gravel and stone, fill in the excavated area, and reseed the grass where the path had been. The 2 trees they had cut down were gone forever, of course, but the removal crew actually did a decent job of grading and reseeding the area. By the end of the week, you could barely tell there had ever been a path through my yard, but the story doesn't end there. A month later, I got a bill in the mail from the HOA for $3,200. According to the invoice, this was my proportional share of the cost to remove the walking path, since the removal was necessitated by my refusal to cooperate with community improvement efforts. I had to laugh. These people just would not give up. I called the HOA office and spoke to the secretary. I'm not paying this bill. The HOA built something on my property without permission, and the city forced them to remove it. I'm not responsible for their mistake. Well, you'll need to take that up with the board. Fine. When's the next board meeting? Next Tuesday at 7 p.m. in the community center. I had never been to an HOA board meeting before, but this seemed like a good time to start. Tuesday evening, I showed up at the community center to find about 20 other homeowners in the meeting room. Apparently, word about the path incident had spread, and people wanted to see what would happen next. Bob was sitting at a table in the front with the other 4 board members, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. The meeting started with the usual boring stuff. Budget reports, landscaping updates, pool maintenance schedules. When they got to new business, I raised my hand. I'd like to discuss this bill I received for path removal costs. Bob's expression tightened. The board determined that since your non-cooperation necessitated the removal of a community improvement project, you should bear the associated costs. But the city ordered the removal because the construction was illegal. The construction was authorized under HOA guidelines, but you didn't have permits or easements. The board determined that permits weren't necessary for internal community improvements. This was getting absurd. Bob was doubling down on his position even after getting cited by the police. I stood up and addressed the room. For those who weren't aware, the HOA built a walking path through my backyard without my permission, without city permits, and without county easements. When I called 911 to report unpermitted construction on private property, the city inspectors found multiple code violations and ordered immediate removal. The HOA president was cited for trespassing and illegal construction. You could hear murmurs around the room as people absorbed this information. Now they want me to pay for removing something they built illegally on my property. One of the other homeowners raised her hand. Bob, is this true? Were you cited by the police? Bob's face was getting red again. The citations were issued due to a misunderstanding of HOA authority. We're appealing through proper legal channels. What legal channels? I asked. You trespassed on my property and did unpermitted construction. There's no misunderstanding here. Another homeowner spoke up. If the HOA can just build whatever they want on our property, what's to stop them from building something in my yard next? Or mine, said someone else. Bob tried to regain control of the meeting, but it was too late. People were asking questions about HOA authority, legal limits, and what other projects might be planned without homeowner consent. The meeting devolved into a 45-minute argument about the scope of HOA powers and whether the board had been overstepping their authority. Several people mentioned other incidents where they felt the HOA had been unreasonable or exceeded their jurisdiction. In the end, the board agreed to review my bill, which was HOA speak for making it go away quietly. But the real victory came 2 months later, when Bob announced he wouldn't be running for HOA president again. Apparently, the stress of dealing with legal issues and angry homeowners had taken the fun out of his power trip. The new HOA president is a retired teacher who actually listens to residents and believes in following proper procedures. She's made it clear that the board works for the homeowners, not the other way around. My backyard is back to normal now. I planted a new garden where the path used to be and put up a privacy fence to make sure nobody gets any ideas about future community improvements. The best part is that other homeowners in the neighborhood learned they don't have to just accept whatever the HOA demands. When you know your rights and you're willing to stand up for them, even the most power-hungry HOA board can be stopped. And sometimes all it takes is one phone call to 911 to remind everyone that HOA agreements don't override city codes, property rights, or common sense. The irony is perfect. Bob wanted to create an emergency access path, so I treated it like the emergency it actually was. His own words about 24-hour emergency access were exactly what I needed to get the city involved. I never did get to see that engineering study he claimed existed. Funny how it was always under legal review whenever anyone asked to see it, almost like it never existed in the first place. These days, when I see Bob around the neighborhood, he usually finds somewhere else to look, which is fine with me. I've got a garden to tend and a perfectly path-free backyard to enjoy. The next one is a petty revenge story. I want to start with, I love dogs. I had dogs 80% of my life. I love dogs. I just don't currently have a dog. Okay, with that in mind, here is my story. I just started living in this nice suburb at the beginning of this year. It is a quiet area, and my girlfriend and I really like it here. But there is a neighborhood Karen. She is your stereotypical retired woman just trying to find something to do with her day. And what she does is walk around the area complaining. Her complaints can be anything about anything, and most of the time she leaves a note on people's mailboxes. I have gotten many of these. Things like your grass is too long or your car is dirty ECT. But when it comes to dogs, she loves to call either the police or code enforcement. A co-worker friend of mine lives close by, and Karen has called the police or whoever on his dog many times. There have even been a few fines handed out for things like dog at large, so sometimes you choose a plan and sometimes a plan chooses you. In mid-October, I was shopping with my brain firmly in low power mode, and I see the shelf of warning signs including "Beware of large dog." The word large caught my eye and got my brain moving. Thoughts like, if I put this up, can I fool her? And if I do this, will I be a neighborhood hero? In the end, I decided not all heroes wear capes and put up the signs in front of my house. It took a few days for me to see Karen looking at my signs and then start staring at my house. Or at least it took me a while to see her kinda stalking my home. Some days she is kinda subtle, and some say she kinda does a wander thing where she is pretty much pacing the area. About 3 weeks after putting up the signs, I was shopping at my local Goodwill because I am classy like that, and I saw a 3-foot dog chain for $2. I was hatching my plan before I even had it in my hand, so there was a chain but no collar, and clearly I needed a big collar. I couldn't find a big collar, but I did find a woman's belt. It's thick with square studs on it, so it kinda looks like a collar for a large dog or maybe a small horse. I hope no one saw me on my drive home. I had the most evil smile on my face the whole time, so the collar and chain are hung by the door for when I would need them. My girlfriend has been rolling her eyes at me through all of this, but she has put up with weirder things from me, so she is fine. So after 4 days on the hook, I see Karen down the street. I race for the door and grab the collar with the manic glee of child at Christmas. When Karen walks by, she sees me holding this monster collar yelling, "Baskerville! Baskerville, come here, boy!" Followed by lots of whistling and wandering around, looking behind my car, things like that. Karen sees this and her eyes go wide with pure but silent terror. I started to smile, so I used my hands to cup over my mouth and kept calling for Baskerville and walked behind my house. I was holding in my laughter so hard I may have gotten a hernia, but if I did, it was worth it. I have done this same thing 5 times in the last few weeks, and it is still as fun as the first time. I am pretty sure I have wasted 14 afternoons of this woman's life. She has spent so much time trying to catch my beloved Baskerville at something she can call the cops on. So far, no one has come to my house like a cop or whatever, and I am pretty sure Karen has caught on to what I am doing. But I only spent $20 on the signs and collar belt, so I feel like I got my money's worth. The next one is an entitled people story. Here's another story from my time working at a very popular theme park in Florida. A magical rat planet of sorts. One year I was promoted to trainer at the resort I worked at. It came with a special pin and an impressive $1 increase by the hour only on training days. Oh boy, I was best at pizza shop and the soup and sandwich shop, S&S, so those were the two bays I trained newbies in. One day I was tasked with training a new elder manager I'll call Esther, fake name, in the S&S shop. Apparently Esther had worked at the magical rat planet before, but had quit for some years and had returned to this resort where she had never worked. Our training session went well, and Esther and I got along fine. She rated me highly on my trainer form. It's customary for newbies to train 2 weeks before being set free on their own. This particular resort had a lot of food bays and a store, so there was quite a bit to learn. However, Esther received less than a week of training, and they gave her the okay to manage us. She didn't know what she was doing most of the time due to this. I don't know why they made that decision, but honestly, many things at that job had gone down and were crappy. We had a computer system that chose positions for the workers, however. The managers would often manually place us in the positions we were good at or enjoyed. Many people had worked there for over 20 years, literally doing the same thing. The lady that trained me had been there for 20 years and only worked in pizza front and S&S shop, which is why I was so good at it after her tutelage. This system worked and everyone was happy. Well, except Esther, who felt that the computer should make the decisions. One day, I was scheduled to clock out at 4 p.m. I had made plans with some friends to go out, and things were already set and paid for. Esther approached me and demanded that I stay until 9 p.m. and train a newbie and close S&S shop because the trainer called out. I politely declined and explained that I had prior engagements and that things were already paid for. Well, she didn't like that and said it was a courtesy that she even asked, as it was my job as a trainer to step in when needed. She said that technically she could force extend my hours and make me do it. I responded that managers could also train and that a part of their job was to step in when workers weren't available. I was polite as she was older. I apologized again and said I couldn't stay. She narrowed her eyes and walked away angrily. From that day forward, she harassed me. One day when she was supposed to be making rounds, she stopped to watch me and burger back. BB. Due to my autoimmune disease, I don't regulate temperature well, so BB was my most hated position as it was extremely hot and the movements hurt my joints. Esther watched me for 30 minutes until I accidentally dropped some tongs. She then proceeded to berate me about not being careful enough. Esther started purposely moving me to burger back so I could be uncomfortable. She would get angry when other managers would move me to pizza, S&S, or cash. She constantly berated me and only me about my appearance. My nails were too long, my makeup was too much. Was I wearing the appropriate socks, though no one could see them? I was constantly in tears and started having panic attacks before going into work. I had other crap going on as well, and her constant harassment was piling onto it. The final straw was when I had a terrible tooth infection. It required an emergency visit where I was given strong antibiotics and some hallucinogen-level opioids. As I was filling my prescription looking busted, I ran into the head manager, Jay. He instantly knew something was wrong as I didn't have on makeup or a wig. I think he was afraid until I explained the situation through tears. He kindly gave me the rest of the day off. After the infection calmed down and the pain subsided, I returned back to work. Jay had informed everyone, and the other managers and workers kindly asked about my condition. Not Esther. As soon as she saw me, she started in on a full uniform and nail inspection. I went to Jay and reported her for workplace harassment. I had witnesses that reported her as well. Jay spoke to her, and apparently she said I was a spoiled, disrespectful brat. Jay told her to knock it off, but by that time I had put in a transfer and was moved to another position at a park that I enjoyed a lot more. I learned from my friends at the resort that Esther turned her venom towards others, and one girl quit after being yelled at by her. A lot of people started quitting for various reasons. I mean, over half of the staff, including the people that had worked there for decades. It's like I started a chain reaction. They sent in a corporate psychologist to assess the situation and conducted employee interviews. Esther and my name came up a lot. Esther was moved to the sit-down restaurant area full-time, but she later left due to having a heart attack. The next one is an entitled parent story. So I'm writing this as less as a Reddit post and more of a personal story and some venting, but to paint a picture before getting into the main thing. 1, she's an alcoholic. 2, she has issues. 3, she's a narcissist, as per the title. 4, she constantly, endlessly verbally abuses and libelly abuses my dad. When I was 15 years old, this being 16 years ago now, the egg donor texted my dad and claimed that I called her a "see you next Tuesday" when at 15 years, one didn't know what one was, and two, was a well-behaved lad in secondary school and when confronted didn't apologize to me or my dad, just acted like she did nothing wrong. This is just one example of the many things that she's done over the years. Here is where we begin. Some might read this and think that I'm holding a grudge from over a decade and a half ago, but the stuff that she has said and done over the years has brought me and my sister to the point that she is dead to us. In my case, she has been for the last 15 years. For my sister, it was a last few years thing. Today, my sister received some money from the egg donor and refused to accept it, instead sending it back as she doesn't want anything to do with the abusive piece of garbage. My sister, who is happy in a relationship with one of the most down-to-earth, based, likable people in the world that I've had the joy of meeting, said that she didn't want to accept the money because she didn't want the egg donor to make posts on FB about her accepting her money but not talking to her, even though the drunkard blocked her on FB after she got called out by my sister regarding something involving my dad, and that she's abusing her by not talking to her but taking her money anyway, this coming from someone who would get drunk at every hour of the morning anytime she had time off from work. This coming from someone who would get drunk on a weekday while she has work, while her kids are at school, and be passed out when they got back, resulting in my sister, the oldest of the children, having to step up and be the mother figure she could never be. According to my dad, she was ranting and raving as she always does, wondering why none of her children love her and acting like she's the victim in all of this. The pissant drunk would lock my sister in her room for talking back to her. The pissant drunk would talk to anyone unfortunate to be considered her friend, and insult her children, insult her husband to said friend without a second thought, and play the victim afterwards when said children only wanted a mom, and her husband did everything, even defending her awful drunk insults that never end. I won't shy away from this next part, but what happened to me a few months ago was a joint effort on my anger getting the better of me and her inability to be a decent human being, drunk or sober. Me and my dad got into an argument regarding said donor while she was smirking behind his back, eyes red and wasted from the 17-plus binge fest she takes part in on a weekendly basis, maybe weekdaily basis. The argument got heated, and after my dad said something about learning that my actions have consequences, I approached the living room door, pointed at a broken glass panel on it, said, "I know that my actions have consequences," and unintentionally put my hand through a glass panel while aiming for the wood of the door on it, severing the tendon and damaging some nerves. I realize I alone am at fault for that, but her drunk desire to be as miserable as her because of her upbringing is not on me. This, as well as the homophobic, transphobic, racist comments she spews, because of course a narcissist would have those worldviews, is why me and my sister no longer have a mom, only an egg donor. My sister has given the donor chance after chance after chance, but the donor pisses it all away because she can't get over the fact my sister is happy without her, successful without her, and more importantly, happy in spite of her. I apologize for the lengthy post. I just wanted to get the word out that despite what people think, you have a choice in who is and who isn't your family. The drunkard stopped being a parent to me when she lied, got my dad to get in my face and shout at me, and refused to apologize for it. For my sister, it was her opening up old wounds. I don't know how many of you reading this are in a bad situation. I don't know how many of you feel like you have to get along with your parent for the sake of the other. But you always have a choice. My sister tried to make a familial relationship work, but the drunkard only wanted it on her terms, saying, "I don't care what you do, so long as you love me regardless." You always have a choice on who is or isn't your family. If any of you are in a situation where your egg donor or sperm donor is abusing you, stay strong, you're better than them. And